Hi everyone. This time we are following a different format for the Fireside Chat series, and whichever day, whichever part of the world you will log in this from, and you will see this video, you can still meet my one of the amazing guests, Ketaki. So I am going to ask Ketaki to introduce herself, and then we are going to, go with the following questions.
Thank you, Supreet. I'm glad how the technical issues led to this, but I'm glad to be finally speaking with you, and I'm glad to be sharing my journey today. So, hi everyone. I'm Ketki Vaidya from Mumbai, India, and I am a product manager with the Artificial Intelligence division at Oracle Hospitality. It's been about 22 days since I moved from India to the US. And apart from my work, on a personal level, I have a podcast which is called as Personal Branding for Professionals. And it's my way of helping the professionals understand how the workplace works, and to help them understand that your work does not speak for yourself. Rather, you have to fight for the opportunities that you deserve, or you have to project yourself really well at work to help everyone understand what value you're adding to an organization, and then help your team understand how you're contributing to the value of a project. So in my podcast, I talk about all of these things. I interview professionals on the same. So I'm glad to be talking about that today, and we will dive into the details as Supreet asks more questions.
Yes, yes. So you were a senior software developer, and then you moved to a product manager. So
Yeah.
talk about, that motivation and what led you to make the switch.
Yeah, so I was an engineering lead with the same team before. And I was the engineering lead, as I told you, I was the engineering lead for the artificial intelligence team. And this had just been a new initiative within our organization. So there were no dedicated product management professionals in our team, and everyone had to do everything. So sometimes developers had to chip in and test the product. Sometimes developers had to chip in and design better for the users or suggest some improvements. So although we did have a product manager, but he was managing multiple teams. So it gave every developer an opportunity to understand the bigger picture and to understand how things worked, or what was product management, or what was testing. So that is how I got an exposure to our field. And there was no set and defined strategy that we followed, because everything that we were doing was like a POC, and then we would do an implementation, and then we would see if it works in the market.
Mm-hmm.
So diving into this new segment was very challenging for everyone, because our roadmap would change on a daily basis. We would decide everything in our stand-up. But when I finally got hold of how things work in product management, I was very interested to be a part of it, especially because I wanted to be on the business side of things. So I felt like I should transition to this field and challenge myself and try what I could do to get into it. And that's how I started having that as a milestone and work toward it.
Awesome, awesome. So talk about, your journey and your choice to move to US for good. Yeah, because I know like so many people ask me, how did you decide to move to US? So yes, talk about that.
Yeah, I think that's a question that a lot of us ponder on, and it's not a very easy question to answer, because there are many factors to consider. You have to leave your family, you're all on your own, and that's not a very good feeling all the time. So I think the pandemic taught us to be alone with our thoughts. It taught us that we can still work from any part of the world. So it was a very big decision for me to decide that I wanted to work in the US, but I had been working with global teams for about 5 years now. And I wanted to get a hang of what the global work culture looks like. So I wanted to travel to different countries and experience the way of work, the way of life there. And that was just to put myself out of my comfort zone. Because when you work at one in one country, I would say, for a longer time, or when you're with an organization for a longer time, you tend to be in a place where you can easily manage things, and then you don't challenge yourself enough. So I felt like that was happening to me, and I wanted to change things. So I added this milestone to my career development plan, where I said I would want to move to the US whenever I get an opportunity. But in order to move to the product management field, It is not a field that you can easily transition into, and you need some prior experience to do that. So I was applying for my master's, but while I was doing that, while I got admits from a few universities, I got an offer to do a lateral move to product management in the same team in California, USA. So I took that opportunity, and I almost felt like I manifested this because
Mhm.
coming to the US was on my plan for about 3, 4 years now.
Wow, wow. Like, this is like power of manifestation where you were able
Yeah.
to, achieve what you dreamt of. So, but yeah, as you said, right, like pivoting is difficult. So on the way,
Mhm.
when you decided to move to product management role, did you take any certifications or how did you develop the skills, to be a PM?
Yeah, so the first thing was the very first step I took was to I did a few courses on LinkedIn Learning and tried to understand what a product manager does. Because when it comes to product management, it's a very abstract field, and I'm still new to the field. I'm learning about it every day, but I feel like there's no one defined definition or template of what product manager role looks like. In some companies, it's a part of the engineering division. In some companies, it's a part of the sales division, or you have more to do with product marketing. So it is a very organization specific role, and therefore you first have to understand if you can internally switch to product management within your company, because that is a very good foundation to have whenever you're trying to break into this field. So
Right.
I networked with a few product managers in my company. And these were not only the ones for my team, but also outside my business unit. And I networked with all of them and tried to understand what their typical day looked like, what are the skills required, and whether these would be my strengths. Because as glamorous as it is, and a lot of people are moving into product management now, once you get into it, you might not like it, or it's not everyone's cup of tea because you need to have it in your personality to be very meticulous and to like giving presentations or to like giving
Yeah.
demos every day. So I assessed if that would be a good fit for me and if I would be a good fit for the role. And once I was sure of that, I took a few LinkedIn learning courses. I did a few Coursera and Udemy courses. That was just to get me started. Then I started building a portfolio to understand how I could develop my product sense. So it was just a regular analysis of what I would improve in WhatsApp, what I would improve in the usual products that I use, and just to understand if the design was good or if anything could be changed. So when you start thinking from that perspective, from a user's perspective, it becomes very interesting. It was a very interesting task for me. And then I was able to get on these opportunities. I talked to my manager, um, got to understand if I could get an opportunity like this, network with a lot of people in the senior management. And then I finally got this offer, which I immediately took.
Wow. Yeah, yeah, of course. It sounds amazing. So I know you briefly touched upon your day to day as a PM,
Mhm.
and I know it's only been 22 days, but would you like to tell the audience as to what a PM looks like, especially in your Oracle hospitality team?
Yeah, I would love to do that. So when it comes to the product manager role, you can think of it as being on the intersection of design, engineering, and strategy. So you have to, it was very difficult for me initially when I started in this role because I was thinking like an engineer. I would only think about a very specific set of things where I would say, this is a bug in the product and I need to get this fixed. But then I had to expand my horizon and think about what the customers would want and what are their pain points. So it is all about empathy. As a product manager, you have to empathize with your customers to understand what is their pain point and what is the next thing that you can do to make it efficient for them. So what we do in Oracle Hospitality, our product is a property management system, and it's a software that helps hoteliers to do their day-to-day operations when they are checking in their guests or checking out their guests and everything that happens in between. So there is a lot that goes on in the hotel that you stay. And it happens a lot that the hoteliers have to stretch their days to accommodate agitated guests or maybe guests who are coming frequently need to be given a special treatment. So there is a lot of management that goes on their side, and they use these property management softwares to handle everything. So when they are at their front desk, every minute, every second is important because the guest is standing in front of them, and they cannot delay. So they're very good with the workflows, they're very good with the way that the softwares work, and they're very fast at it. So we had to first understand what is their pain point, what is it that could be improved, because this has been evolving as a software since 40 years now. And we've recently moved it to cloud from on-premise. So there are a lot of things that the cloud software does not offer, which they would want, which they had expected from a long time, which they had in the earlier versions. So we had to drill that down and prepare a strategy for that. Then sometimes you also get ideas from the internal teams. So there's just some feedback that the other teams might be giving on the feature that you're developing. So you need to be collecting all those ideas. So a huge part of your PM role is idea collection, and it can come from anywhere. It's not that you have to sit and do all the brainstorming yourself. But once the idea collection is done, then you come to prioritization, where you work with your product strategy team to understand which idea would be the best to pursue. And only after you have done all of that and you can collect data to arrive at that decision, only after you have done all of that, then you invest your engineering team to start working on it. And then you invest your sales team to start marketing it. So before you come to that step, you have to be absolutely sure that this is going to work. And that's a huge pressure and huge decision to make on your side, because it all comes down to one individual depending on the success for the product. So, as a product manager, I would say, just to sum it up, you are responsible for the product success, and everything that happens right from the ideation to the conceptualization of the idea until the time that the product becomes a part of the market and it goes to your customers. You are responsible for the entire life cycle. So the good thing about it is you get to understand the end-to-end life cycle. You get to understand how your product is impacting lives. So it's a very good sense of purpose that you get as a part of your work. And the con for that is you are responsible for everything, and anyone can blame you if anything goes wrong.
Totally makes sense. So what about the AI aspect of it, right? Because I know it's
Hmm.
Oracle's
Yeah.
AI hospitality team. So can you talk about that as well? And what are the skills that, you probably built in that space to get here, or even if did you even require it at the first place?
Absolutely. So I'll tell you how our team was formed, because that will set a good context for why we do a certain set of projects. So the first thing was, as the hospitality industry, I've always felt that in the hospitality industry, the progress is a little slow as compared to the other industries, because the hoteliers are usually resistant to change. And when they're working a certain way, when they're able to serve their guests by working a certain way, they don't want to change it easily. So it was a huge task for us to get our customers to cloud from on-premise, because they felt like everything was going good with on-premise. But only when the pandemic happened and they had to explicitly be present in the surroundings in their workplace in order to get the work done, in order to operate the softwares, then they realized that going to the cloud was a good idea, because they could still work from home and they could manage things from their home even when the hotel had been shut down. So that was a good understanding for everyone to say that, okay, I need to move on to the cloud. So once we had established that, we felt like there was no innovation happening in this space. And in order to match up with the industry trend, in order to be competitive enough with other softwares that were in the space, we had to add a few artificial intelligence initiatives, because we collected a lot of data from our customers. And if we got the necessary agreements signed, we could use that data to determine the user behavior, and we could use that data to brainstorm on the new features that this product could have. So a typical feature walkthrough of our product includes the billing module, or it can have a screen to check in your guests, it can have a screen to check out your guests, and then it has a few loyalty programs that you can handle. So all of these modules are very good in order to analyze the data and start working on what insights you might be able to offer to your customer. And the most challenging part about this is that the customers don't know that they need it. But once you offer it to them, they are amazed at the possibilities that can arise out of the data insights you provide. So our first project as the artificial intelligence division was we prepared a chatbot And this was in order to add a new conversational interface for our customers where they could just chat with a bot and enter the customer's details, enter their guest details, and they could check in the guest. So consider a scenario where there is a group check-in that's happening. So maybe there's a cricketers team that is checking into a hotel. So they can use the chatbot on a tablet or on a mobile device. They don't have to be at their desks, and they can quickly check in all of their guests at once. Or if there is a housekeeping staff that's moving around the hotel in order to inspect the rooms for check-in of their guests. So I have to say that this room is clean, and only then it can go to a guest who is scheduled for check-in that day. And then I have to say that this room is inspected, this room is dirty. So they keep tracking these housekeeping statuses of every room in order to determine which room is ready whenever a guest signs in. So they could use the tablet, they could use the chatbot to say that I want this room to be clean, I want this room to be changed to dirty now because the guest is checked out. So we did things like that where we developed these use cases. And once we rolled it out to our customers, first of all, we had to convince our customers that they had to try it out. And again, there was a lot of resistance to say, why do I need it when everything works well in the application? But this gave them the ability to multitask because when they were doing something on the screen, which was a major workflow, they could quickly chat with the bot in a few clicks, or they could give voice commands and they were able to accomplish everything. So that was one of the first projects that we developed. And there are initiatives like these that we work on in order to address our customer pain points.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. So that's a very interesting, I would say, initiative and a very interesting, role to be. So now
Yeah.
switching gears a little bit towards, your personal branding and your podcast. So what was the motivation behind starting a podcast? When did you start it? And how did you build upon it?
Sure. So I think this is something, it's a pandemic baby, I would say, on the podcast. And a lot of us have been in that situation where during the pandemic we felt like we've lost our sense of purpose, or we felt depressed for no reason
Right.
because of the surroundings and everything happening. And then working from home all the time with no human connection as such with your team or even with your friends. It was a hard time. And so I was feeling very depressed and low. And I felt like I could get back on my feet just by helping others who were going through the same situation. So that was one of the motivations to start that. The other motivation was when I started working with Oracle, when I started working with Oracle Hospitality. I've been with them for 5 years now. But when I started working for the different teams here, there was within the first 2 years, I received a feedback that my work was not creating enough impact. And to hear that from my manager 1 year after I'd been working so hard was very difficult for me to digest because I was ready to improve on whatever could be done. But I also felt like I was just putting my head down and working without showing others what I was doing, or without participating in various brainstorming sessions where I could have really shown my value. So that was a waking up call for me, where I decided to take things in my hand, and then I started scheduling regular check-ins with my team, with my managers, to understand how I was doing in a particular month. And that gave me a chance to address the specific data points or the specific attributes that I could improve on. That way, I got hold of better projects. I got hold of projects that aligned with my interests. And at the same time, everyone knew about my contributions because I was talking about my accomplishments during those check-ins. I was talking about the things that I learned. So that created a huge impact in the way that I was being perceived at my workplace, where my perception about my work was finally aligned with what others thought of me. And that's a very important trait, and it's a very important skill to have in today's work from home era, where everyone is just caring about their own work assignments. But then, if you're not doing enough to talk about your accomplishments in the right platforms, or if you don't have the right people who talk about you in the right meetings, then you might lose out on the opportunities that you deserve because of the work that you did. So that was a wake up call for me, because of which I started my podcast to create this awareness that you cannot leave it onto the system to get promotions or to get better projects or better visibility. And you have to do it yourself. And it's very challenging at first, but once you start doing it, it becomes second nature. And that's the idea that I want to put across.
Wow, wow. But also you've had like some of the, amazing guests and some of the amazing LinkedIn influencers on your
Yeah,
podcast. So obviously your podcast was able to, attract great people, and some of them, honestly, I knew much before because they were, they had a very strong presence on LinkedIn. We had Vidya,
right.
Srinivasan, we had Christina, to name a few. So what are the challenges you feel that you faced like while you wanted to grow this? And you might still be facing them.
Yeah, so one of the challenges first when I started this was once you start building your personal brand, everyone gives you the advice that you have to find your niche. And I was not sure what my niche was because I just had one idea in mind, but I didn't know if it was specifically to be termed this or that. And sometimes I wanted to experiment and deviate a little and see if I could do something on data. Maybe I could do something around women in tech because there are many things that I'm passionate about as an individual, and I didn't know how to get it into my podcast. But then I learned to shelter everything under one term, personal branding, because that's a very exhaustive term and you can interpret it your way. So then I started doing the specific personal branding for data scientists, personal branding for women in tech, and that way I could address the areas that I was passionate about. At the same time, it all felt under one logical umbrella where people could understand that they want to come to this channel if they want to learn about personal branding. So that was the first idea which I learned by talking to a lot of podcasters out there because they were doing it for a long time. That was one thing. The other challenge that I faced was when I was reaching out to guests. There were two aspects to it. One, that I was amazed at how many people out there are ready to help you if you are ready to ask. You just have to be polite and considerate of their time. And if you message them about why you're interested to do this and why you think they would be a good fit, and you research well about what they're doing, that's a prerequisite, then a lot of people are ready to be a part of your initiative or support it in any way that they can. Sometimes they would say yes. Even if they said no, they would connect me to someone who could be a better fit on my show. So that was one aspect. The other aspect I felt was there were also a lot of people out there when I was cold messaging them, they were very rude to me. And they would just say that I don't have time for shit like this. Or they would just give me these comments, which would be very discouraging. But I learned that it's very situation focused, and it depends on when your message is landing in their inbox and what their day has been like. So you don't have to take everything personally, but in order to maximize how many people you want to invite on your show, you have to constantly send them personalized invites, connect with them, engage with their posts for about 3, 4 months before approaching them, and just be a part of their journey in some way where your name registers in their mind, and then they would be open to being a part of your show. So you have to give them something before you ask from them. And that's something that I learned with trial and error, by doing this with multiple guests.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it's on point because I have had similar experiences when I try to
Yeah,
reach out to guests for my fireside chat series. So yeah, I
I can completely
completely
relate.
same. I can completely relate to that. So that's awesome. So what's I think there are two more things I would like to touch upon before I close this. One is
Mhm,
doing so many different things. I feel like the imposter syndrome hits you really hard.
mhm.
So, what has been your take on it, and how are you dealing with it, or how did you deal with it if you already overcame it?
Yeah, I would agree that imposter syndrome, in some way, it exists in all of us, and we just didn't know the term for it. But now that we read articles on workplace burnout and we read articles on imposter syndrome, we know that this is what we are feeling. But it's very natural to feel that because I feel that it's a good thing to have imposter syndrome because it only occurs when you're trying to push yourself beyond your limits. So having imposter syndrome is an indicator that you're growing. So that's one way to look at it. And self-doubt and underconfidence at times will always be a part of your journey when you try something new. But the only way to tackle it to just do more of what makes you uncomfortable. So when I started my podcast shows initially, um, the way that I structured my podcast interviews was very different. I would have written questions and I would just stick to those questions when I interviewed with those guests. But eventually, when I did enough of the podcast episodes, I realized that you have to let the guest go with their flow. So you have to come with a predefined direction in your mind that this is what you want to give to your audience. But you cannot have a set path that this is where the conversation will go, because sometimes they'll already cover a few things that was your next question, and then you have to just improvise and adapt to what your next question might be. So that's how I learned to deal with my imposter syndrome, is by just doing more podcast episodes. And then I would constantly stop and reflect on how far I've come in order to feel grateful, in order to feel more confident that I could do this. And then a huge part of it was also my audience, because they started giving me very good feedback on LinkedIn. They started sharing my posts, or I would get messages like, I was feeling low today, but your podcast episode made my day. So those were just some things to live by, which kept me going. And eventually, it will always exist, the self-doubt, but it gets lesser in the extent to which it controls you. And then you start controlling how you feel at that moment. So this is just my advice for everyone. If you feel imposter syndrome, take it as a sign of growth, and then just keep doing more of what makes you uncomfortable, and eventually you'll be able to live with it.
Exactly, exactly. I think that's so powerful, and that's such a different way to look, in this situation, and a very
Yeah.
positive way to, look for when you're kind of perceiving imposter syndrome. So one last question is, I know I personally follow all your LinkedIn posts, and I know you write so well. So anyone who wants to get into content creation, right? Like, what's one piece of advice that you would like to give them?
Yeah. So when it comes to content creation, the first thing is to determine which platform you want to be. And there's a common trend right now where people say that you have to be on all platforms in order to have your audience. But it does not work that way, especially when you begin. You don't have a team that you can delegate your tasks to. You're doing this with your work. And you also have a lot of other tasks to handle. So the first thing is just determine one platform that you're comfortable with. It can be LinkedIn, it can be Instagram, it can be anyone, it can be YouTube as well. But just determine your platform. The next thing is determine your medium of communication. So, as individuals, we prefer different ways of communication that we are comfortable with. So, I might be more comfortable with video than I am with text, or than I am with writing, or I might be more comfortable with audio than I am with video. So, you just have to determine what works for you, because when you start, you have to be in a position where you're absolutely comfortable, because there are a lot of unknowns already. So you don't want another aspect to be added to it. So determine your platform, determine your medium of communication. Once you do that, there's a common pressure to find your niche. But what I've understood is it's not necessary to find your niche, because your audience adapt to what you start writing about or what you start talking about. And then you get a leeway to experiment with several topics. So when you start, you can experiment with several topics that you are passionate about. If you don't have anything directly on your mind, you can just start talking about what your day looks like, or what your profession looks like, um, or what you are feeling at any point of time, because that career stage might be a good it might be a good insight for anyone in the similar boat, and they might learn a lot from you. So you start by thinking about just one or two people that you can make a difference in their lives by doing something, by talking about these things. And then as you write, constantly seek feedback from people who are not your friends, because they'll show you the mirror and they'll give you the actual feedback. Your friends might be biased because they like the content you post, or they might give you very harsh feedback at times. But if you reach out to certain people in your network who you know professionally, they might be able to help you with what you can improve on the content, and you can ask your audience to see what topics they might want you to talk about. And then the frequency also matters. So you have to be consistent with it, otherwise you will get demotivated and you'll just leave because you don't see results initially. So for
Exactly.
that, I would say just pick a time that you're comfortable with, and maybe you can post once a month, once in 15 days. You don't have to post daily when you're starting, but you can post once in 15 days, once a week, depending on what works for you. And this is something that you can batch process during your weekends and then roll it out during the months so that you are having a lot of content to share. So
Mm-hmm.
these are just a few strategies that will help you feel more comfortable in the beginning. And once you start seeing the comments that people post, or people sharing your posts, or people talking about it, then you will definitely get the motivation to expand. Then you can expand, go to video, go to audio, start writing
Mm.
articles, and then it's an easier transition. But to take all of it when you're beginning, that will be too much, and you might get discouraged and give up. So start very small and take it one step at a time.
Wow, wow. I think this is so powerful. So thank you so much, Ketki. I think it was a wonderful, enlightening session for me, and I'm sure for our audience who will watch it later. So thank you so much for coming, being our guest at Databuzz. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, same here. So